Alpha males, I got some bad news for you. Not only are your follicles feminine, they're feminists. This is Back to the Barber, where scalp conditions are met and maintained. It's your host, AQBS, but most importantly, a fellow client. Hope all is well today, gents. The primary topic is your follicles are feminists, seconded by other relevant information and commentary. So let's get started. This is and has been a doozy for me. Right in the beginning of my hair loss type of, let's just say, my journey, and I was attempting to regrow my hair back now a few years back. All the research I did and the conclusions I came up with was, it seemed to be that in general, I can say it very simply now, and I can say it matter of factly, that you are basically inhibiting what makes you, in ways, a man. Now, it sounds pretty funny to say that, but when you really think about it, it's pretty much what we do when it comes to hair restoration, as far as inhibiting. And this is usually not to regrow hair per se, but it's usually to stop hair loss. And this is for both men and women. When women have hair loss, they tend to inhibit DHT or androgens. When men have hair loss, they do the same exact thing. As a matter of fact, when specific, let's just say, hormones are presented to women, a lot of times they have the same problems that we have as far as hair loss is concerned. This happens a lot of times when it comes to menopause. Estrogen is off balance, or the production is down. That is then replaced with testosterone, which will be converted to DHT. Depends on the health of the woman, right? And next thing you know, you will see hair loss begin to happen. And if you ever notice that, you will see a lot of times an overweight woman, and it won't be something like 20, 30 pounds. It would be 100, 200 pounds overweight, probably 200 pounds overweight or something like that. And if you ever notice that, it would be diffusion of the hair, or it'd be like woman's hair loss, because she has, for the lack of better words, enough fat. And I'm not saying that to be in a joking manner. I'm simply saying that one of the things I notice about male pattern balding for men is the loss of subcutaneous fat. When it comes to the woman's side of it, the problem may not be as apparent as that. It may be more or less closer to the fact that there are just too much DHT. The DHT is in the system because of inflammation. We can't see the inflammation on the outside. What we just see is a woman who may not be at her correct BMI or weight, but on the inside there are other things going on. This is usually coupled with or comorbid with acne, reddening of the face, things of this nature. You'll see it a lot of times when it comes to people with hair loss. Okay, but see, this video again is called Follicles Are Feminists. Now, why would I say that? Because the follicles want nothing to do with testosterone in ways, but not testosterone or test. It would be closer to its, let's just say, evil stepbrother, which would be DHT. But I'll tell you exactly how that's happening. Now, there are a few things that have brought me to this conclusion. 7 major things that have brought me to the conclusion that follicles are feminists. And I'm just going to give you a basic subject line of them, and then I'll go back down and I'll kind of describe this. Number 1, they have immune privilege, like the placenta or the uterus. Their hairs, what I refer to as babies, have growth stages like the embryo. They are estrogen dominant, not test or DHT. They love environments that are supple, flexible with subcutaneous fat, estrogen-like. They are tribe dependent, the regions of the scalp, yet they are independent. Number 6 is they are androgen intolerant. And 7, when it comes to reversing hair loss and or at least halting hair loss, we have to deal with the prostate meds, and we also have to deal with estrogenic herbs. So these are 7 reasons why I truly believe that follicles are feminist. Now let me give you some details of number 1. The immune system of the body is supposedly attacking the follicles. This happens in a lot of autoimmune diseases, and male pattern balding, or what you refer to as androgenetic alopecia, is no different. To me, and generally speaking, acute follicle stress coming from the immune system, let's just say taking part in the attacking, quote unquote, of the follicles, is probably accurate. And I don't want to go into it in this particular video because it's its own video. But the point I'm making is, why would the hair follicles have immune privilege? Immune privilege means that they are kind of segmented or separated from the body's immune system that starts in the gut. Just like the placenta. Think about it. The placenta has to have its own immune privilege. In other words, it has to be separated from the body's immune system to protect the child. The child is growing so fast, generally speaking, that the body may think that it is some sort of problem, that is some overgrowth, or is some tumor that it needs to get rid of in order to protect you. Therefore, the placenta has immune privilege. It's privileged away from the immunity. It has immunity, right? And this is where we get that word from. It has immunity. Now, when it comes to the hair follicle, it's the same exact thing. So why would the hair follicles on the scalp have immune privilege? Because their agenda is to protect the actual follicle's baby, which is the hairs. The placenta is protecting its baby. The follicles are protecting theirs, which is the hair. And isn't it ironic that is a such thing as hair follicles, and then there's a such thing as egg follicles inside of the uterus? Isn't it ironic? They both behave the same exact way. They both are producing something in order to grow out of the body and eventually falling off, right? And that's kind of like the placenta. It eventually, when the baby is ready, the placenta comes on off and it's born. Same thing with the terminal hairs. Now, this takes me to my second point. The hairs have a growth stage like the embryos. We've all seen the diagrams where the embryo starts as an egg and a sperm. And then we see that the embryo kind of moves by, the cells get together, where the sperm and egg gets together, the cells collide, they start forming more cells, more cells, more cells. Then you see this little salamander-like thing grow, and then it becomes a human baby. It goes through these stages in about 10 months. Well, the hair is the same exact way. You have the dermapapilla, which is kind of like the 3D hair factory of the follicle. It gets hormone growth factors. Some of it call it TGF beta. Some of them call it like human growth hormones. These things almost impregnate the dermapapilla. It begins to create some sort of villus hair, and that villus hair, once the placenta roots itself deep enough into the scalp, then it becomes a terminal hair. A lot of people don't really think about it this way, but the dermapapilla, or the follicle, is impregnated by the growth hormones of the scalp. Therefore, if your scalp is, let's just say, having a hard time with circulation, having a hard time in this environment with pathogens and infection and inflammation, it cannot appropriately impregnate the follicle. And even if it did, it still can't support it afterwards. Think about that for a second. The male sperm impregnates the egg of the uterus. And after she has the baby, the male is supposed to take care of what it helped produce, which is the child. The same exact thing with the scalp environment. The scalp, the growth hormones from the scalp, TGF beta, ones that we don't know of, impregnate the dermal papilia, which then grows a root. And next thing you know, you have hair, and this hair needs to be taken care of by the circulation of the scalp. Everything from neurogenesis, the electricity from the nerves, and you're talking about minerals, vitamins, everything it needs, keratin, just everything it needs in order to grow, to be healthy, and to live for the next 5 to 7 years, like most hairs. And just like the baby, when it's done growing in the womb, it exits the womb and the placenta goes with it. When the terminal hair is done growing, it is pushed out of the follicle just for a new one to be born again, because the body will give itself a rest, and then it will again become impregnated by the environment. So the hair grows in that stage as well, just like the embryos, and they leave the womb, and the terminal hairs leave the womb. There's a resting period, and next thing you know, it happens again. 3, estrogen dominant, not test, not DHT. Consider that the uterus and its hormones and its environment is estrogen based. Now, we know it's estrogen based because a woman has more estrogen, and she's more estrogen dominant than a man. Men will be testosterone or test based or test dominant. And the more tests you have, more than likely the more DHT you will have too. DHT is a derivative of test. I believe that it is a steroid made by test to do 2 things. Number 1, more than likely to help with male physique, from beards, mustaches, hair on your legs, things of this nature. But it also helps as a inflammation inhibitor. It helps to help the body recover from injury and inflammation and infection. This gives you a clue to why DHT will be in a scalp. And that same scalp will have irritation, bumps, tenderness, and hair loss, right? Now, estrogen dominant is something that we don't really think about too much when it comes to the scalp. But I can say this: women usually have thicker, longer hair than men, usually. And when you do see a male with hair that looks like a woman, it really stands out a lot. It really stands out a lot because most of the time, men have scalps that are closer to the alpha scale. What do I mean by the alpha scale? I put alpha and omega in a line. Just like your typical math, where you have the positives on one end and the negatives on the other end, and 0 in the middle. Well, the negatives will be the alpha scale. -7, that's Norwood 7. -6, that's Norwood 6, all the way back down to Norwood 1, which is a male without pretty much male pattern balding, at least visually. You have 0, which is a perfect balance between the alpha and the omega. You have the +1, +2s. That's where most women will lie. And then you have all the way up to +7 on the omega scale. And that's women that you've seen that have the most beautiful, long, thick hair possible. And it makes you think, how could you support that amount of hair? The hair that you have that looks heavy, that is going down their back, down their butts, and it is on their forehead. It's on the side of their heads. That's a true omega scalp. Most women don't have that. Most women have the typical +1 or +2, and most men without male pattern balding would have -1 or -2. People like myself and people with male pattern balding, we move more toward the negative, the lower extremities of negatives. -7 in my case, I will be -7 plus. In other words, if there was an 8, I'll probably be there because I'm bald all the way on the top. I was bald on the sides, and I even had some of my eyebrow hair get a little fadey at the tips. Now, that what that scale says is the more you are prostate dominated, DHT dominated, you will be, and I'm talking about from a scalp perspective, you will be closer to the negatives, -7 on out. The more balance you have, you're more pulled toward the middle. That's the -1s and -2s. If you stick there, you just have a nice set of hair, right? When you start, most men don't have to go to 0 or +1 or +2 to the omega scale, but you get the drift. The closer you are to the uterine scale or estrogen, the better your hair is. The more DHT or prostate dominant, you will be closer to the alpha, right? So number 4, supple, flexible with subcutaneous fat. We all know that a lot of men, you would ask a man what's the perfect body type for a man, and we would say muscles, low amount of body fat, probably below 10 body fat, veins, a nice V taper, nice shoulders, and legs that can support us. We will not say suppleness. We will not say softness. We won't say any of those things, right? When it comes to what we refer to as like a alpha body or masculine frame. But when it comes to the scalp, that's the opposite of what you need. Think about it. When you saw men with bald heads, right? A lot of times those bald heads look tight. Don't even look like they can move. It doesn't look loose at all. It looks tight, like you can't like pinch it. It looks like it's sitting right on top of the bone. As a matter of fact, if you look closely at men with extreme male pattern balding, you will notice that they have a lot more indentations and skull, like you can kind of see almost the shape of the skull because it's so bald that the subcutaneous fat was stripped away by DHT. And that's one of the things that I think that happens is that when DHT gets into your scalp because of your inflammation, right? The body looks and says, okay, you have acute follicle stress. You have all these problems going on as far as the infection, probably some sort of pathogen, a protein that has gotten away. Your follicles are inflamed. They're calling for help. They're shutting down. What happens is the body takes tests and converts this to DHT to deal with the inflammation. But once it deals with the inflammation, it actually shuts them follicles' mouths. And what happens is hair loss comes after that. Now, going back to original point, supple, flexible, subcutaneous fat. Without fat, the follicles do not have a resource to use in order to create hairs. I believe that the subcutaneous fat, the hypodermis area, is where the mouth of the dermal papillae is, where the straw is that's kind of sucking up the minerals, the vitamins from the blood, everything that you need, the proteins in order to build the babies, the terminal hairs in order to feed them. If you rid yourself of the subcutaneous fat area, stripped away by DHT, which is like a steroid that would strip away a male's strong physique. Think about it. When we take steroids in the gym, we do so that we can look like we are ripped, so we can look like we have less fat. But when that happens to the scalp, it's the opposite effect. The scalp actually needs suppleness. It needs tension to be released. This is why a lot of times they say hair loss is associated with tension, muscle relaxation. That needs to happen. It needs to be flexible, and there does need to be a level of fat there, not just for consuming, but see, the follicle sitting directly on top of a fiber or the skull, theoretically, it causes stress, just like if you were to have a car without the proper equipment on the wheels, right? The shock absorbency. Without shock absorbency on cars, and if you were to drive a car like that, you will, by the time you're done and you get home from a 30-minute drive, you won't want to drive anymore, because you're going to feel every bump, every move, every rock, every crevice in that road, right? Every time you stop on brakes, you'll feel all that. And the same thing with the follicles. Without the subcutaneous fat level, without the shock absorbency level, that produces even more stress. Hunger stress, stress from the DHT, right? The steroid, now stress from the stripped DHT, the stripped subcutaneous fat level. And then now you probably have the pathogen or protein that caused the autoimmune response to make it worse. Now, this goes to my theory that the onset of male pattern balding or androgenetic alopecia is acute follicle stress, but that's another video. Tribe dependent, number 5, yet independent. We always say in different spheres that men seem to be more, let's just say, independent. A lot of times when it comes to thought processes, less groupthink. Science agrees. Most people will agree that women seem to be better at groupthink when it comes to, tribally speaking. And the same with follicles. We always call them, where they're independent. Each follicle is each follicle, but that's not the way that it works. Because if each follicle was the same, right, then you would not have something called the Hamilton-Norwood pattern. See, the Hamilton-Norwood pattern shows up in all men when it comes to severe hair loss. You thin at the crown, you thin at the 2 temples, and or your hairline moves back. Very rarely you just get thinning all the way around the top, and even if you do, it will be more thinning in those areas. Now, it's universal to men, thus we thought it was a final form. In other words, this is the way that you're supposed to look, because if this was not Mother Nature, then people will bald different. So I understand why they came up with that conclusion. Now, here's the thing about that. That is actually showing you how the immune system is shutting down. It's giving you a diagram of how the immune system is shutting down the easy areas first, which is the 2 temples and the crown. When it comes to the tribe dependency, yet independent, the follicles are independent because you can remove one. That's what hair transplants do. When they actually transplant hairs, they do it each follicle independently. However, when it comes to growth factors, it's been stated many times that they pass these growth factors in between them in order to grow. So if follicles 1, 2, and 3 are having issues with DHT, having issues with circulation, having issues with a pathogen or inflammation, they pass these messages over to other follicles, and those other follicles begin to get defensive. Then their immune systems start getting ready for war. And they say it differently than what I'm saying. I'm kind of breaking it down in layman's terms. But follicles pass communication through hormones, and I truly believe also signaling too, that may be electric in nature, in order to tell each other what to do and what not to do. TGF beta is a prime example of how it is the growth hormone. However, on the opposite end, when you have too much cortisol, when you have too many of these, let's just say, bad signaling, you will find that the follicles don't tell each other to grow. They tell each other to go in comatose mode. And that is the essence of male pattern balding, is that once the bulk of the follicles are retreating from this war between DHT, the immune system, the pathogen, and themselves and their immune privilege, most of the time, in order to save themselves, they go into a comatose state. So tribe dependent, from communication perspective, from a hormonal perspective, that means that when you start restoring your hair, you will restore everything. And eventually, once some follicles begin to grow, I say the more hair, the more hair, the more hair, the less hair, the less hair, the less hair, because the more hair you start beginning to activate, the more hormones that are shared and the more the communication between the follicle state, it is okay to grow and to take care of our babies. Number 6, androgen intolerant. This goes back to the same point, and this goes anywhere. When women have too many of the androgens, DHT, for example, they have hair loss. When you remove, or aromatase is a perfect example. There are some drugs called aromatase that they've given women with cancers. But the problem with aromatase is once you start inhibiting it, then DHT gets out of balance and they begin to have male pattern balding, but we be calling women pattern balding. But it would have never happened without inhibiting inhibiting aromatase. Now, I had learned this 9 months ago, and it was one of my first aha moments when I said, wait, you inhibit aromatase and estrogen, then male pattern balding kicks in. What if I could do the opposite and inhibit male hormones, or to increase female hormones in the scalp locally or topically to see if I can get the opposite effect? And when I start studying on what herbs were estrogenic in nature, what plants and botanicals are estrogenic in nature, and I began to put that towards looking towards what was working in the field of research from a synthetic perspective and from a natural perspective, you will start seeing that, wow, it's correct. So it's the androgens or the DHT that doesn't necessarily belong in the scalp in the, let's just say, the quantity that it is a balance problem. The body always has DHT. The body always has test. The body always has estrogen. But when those things go out of balance, it becomes problematic for the person. Now, with that stated, the follicles are androgen intolerant. They want to have a supple, circulating, resource heavy environment that is supportive of their children, the terminals. They don't want something that looks like dried, that looks like it's DHT is kind of like the Rambo of testosterone. For every one estrogen soldier, DHT would have 5. Test would have 2. And so in other words, for you to balance your estrogen and your estrogen and test is much easier. So men will know what 1 and 2, just regular scalps without visually balding, they will have a good balance between, they will have more test, but enough estrogen to balance it out. But men with a high number of DHT, there's not enough estrogen to combat that amount of soldiers, because for every, one estrogen soldier, DHT will equal 5 of itself, right? So to take 25 estrogen soldiers just to deal with 5 DHTs. So that balance of that war will be off, and then you would get balding. So androgen intolerant, they want estrogen. They want the environment to be like a uterus. They want the environment to be like the follicle, the egg follicle, because they are basically mothers, and mothers are feminine. Thus, follicles are feminists, right? But we'll go to that in number 7. This will just take it home. Prostate meds. Now, all the other ones I stated, it's pretty obvious, right? You probably heard some of the information, maybe you hadn't. But you do know that most of the inhibitors of DHT was meant to be medicines for enlarged prostates. One of the most famous ones, FDA approved, was meant originally to kind of combat the enlarging of the prostate. And when it did that, you start seeing hair grow back. Now, plenty of them are out on the internet, and that people are using now. maybe not FDA approved, but they are being used for hair growth or hair loss when they were originally meant and created for a prostate problem. Now think about it. You're inhibiting the prostate, which you can't think of anything else that is more masculine nature than a man's private area, including the prostate, right? That is being inhibited so that men would not have hair loss or to stop it. Now, the herbs, as stated earlier, that help hair loss, such as flax seeds, such as saw palmetto, such as mint, these are the same herbs that are in all these synthetic type of commercial solutions, and even natural natty ones too, right? But what they don't say is that those are phytoestrogenic. In other words, they behave like estrogen. So when you take all of these things home and you look at an alpha scalp, totally bald, inflexible, less fat, ripped pretty much, and then you look at a supple omega scalp, plenty of hairs, supple, no tension there, a lot of resources in order to feed the hairs and the babies. And you look at women with this long, beautiful hair. A lot of times they are not very muscled women. They are very supple, as far as you can just tell they have a softness about them that is completely opposite of the ripped guy with, 8% body fat, right? When you take these things home, you see that follicles on the scalp will deal with testosterone. They'll deal with it because it's needed, right? But they do not like DHT. They say F DHT, just like the thumbnail says. That's meant for a reason. They say F DHT. We don't want anything to do with it. We don't need it at all. As long as we got tests, we're good, right? And when you consider that the follicles are feminist, and if you're balding, you can say, well, I have too much of the alpha scalp. I need to move the environment over to the omega scalp. And what happens after that, gentlemen, you start seeing that this is not a theory. This is facts. When you start looking at your follicles are as feminist, as feminine in nature, the opposite of a male, then you would start begin to grow hair back because you would look at it pretty much differently. The last thing I say is that men who transition over from men to women, what do they give them? Women hormones, right? A lot of times synthetic too. What happens a lot of times with men who have male pattern balding, but they transition over to a woman, they grow their hair back. And I'll leave you with that one. So that's my video for today. Hopefully something here has helped you to halt hair loss and or restore it. If so, hit the like up, subscribe. If not, give another video a chance. I'm pretty sure you'll find something interesting. But if I can do it, you can do it too. Let's get you back to the barber.